Okay, everybody, hi. My name's Jay, and I worked on Diablo. This is Shout at the Devil, making of Diablo 3. I was really proud of that title, by the way. I spent 5 minutes working on the title, but I was very proud of it. So as I mentioned, my name's Jay Wilson. I'm game director at Blizzard Entertainment. This is some of the stuff that I've worked on. Mostly a mix of RTSs and action games. I actually started on first-person shooters kind of early in my career. The size and distribution of there's a formula there about the personal value I have for each product and how near and dear they are to me, but it's not interpretable by any of you, but it means a lot to me. All right, goals of this talk. Explain the concept of core pillars. A lot of this talk is about this idea of core pillars that permeated the project and helped drive a lot of the vision for it. Review the Diablo III core pillars. We've got a bunch of them I'll talk about. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll talk a little bit about each one. Provide examples of them in action, where we did them right, kind of where we did them wrong, and just also some places where they conflicted and how we resolved those things. And then hopefully I will say smart stuff that makes me seem smart. If so, though, I had a lot of help with this talk, so you can feel free to credit it to somebody else, because it obviously wasn't me. All right, some facts. Diablo 3 is a sequel. Diablo and Diablo 2 were super successful games. I did not work on those games. This is common in making games. So whether you inherit a beloved series, as I did and as Soren Johnson did on Civilization, whether you inherit a beloved character like Batman, as Rocksteady did, or whether you inherit a big, giant, wonderful franchise like Star Wars. This is very common. It's likely to happen to most people in the game industry. At some point, you're going to be working on a sequel to a game you didn't make or an IP that you didn't create. And it's what happened to me with Diablo 3. So my first recommendation for if this happens to you is don't do what I did. Don't panic. You can inherit something wonderful and turn it into something great. And hopefully, some of the things I talk about today will kind of help you avoid some of the mistakes we did and also do some of the things right that we did as well. The question is, to do this, what do you do? How do you get it just right? Well, you can play it safe, which a lot of people are going to say this is what they want, especially your most dedicated players are going to say, yeah, don't change anything, just kind of update the graphics, is what we like, you know. And this is good. It honors the past. There's a lot to be said for playing it safe. But for a development team filled with creative types, it's just death. If you completely play it safe, you're going to have a team of people who are just filling in the numbers and filling in the color by number. They're going to be bored. They're going to be frustrated. It's just, you can't get a group of creative people and just say, yeah, do what those other people did, kind of about the same. So it also can create stagnation. I think we all have had a favorite. Usually TV shows are kind of the best examples because TV shows have these kind of cycles where they just don't know where they're going to end. And a lot of TV shows will go that 1 or 2 seasons longer than they really should have. And the thing is, that's stagnation, and it's one of the quickest ways to ruin something that we love. So the other side of it is you can reinvent the wheel. You can change everything, and this is super exciting. This is what a lot of people are like, yeah, let's change it all. It certainly prevents the stagnation problem, because if you change everything, you're not going to stagnate. The problem is this doesn't really honor the subject matter that you're paying tribute to. Obviously, if you've inherited an IP or you're making a sequel, it's because there was something there that people loved, and you don't want to lose that either. So the question is, how do you get it just right? And hopefully, this kind of core pillar idea is what can help with that. So I got this idea from this handsome gentleman. He has lovely hair. His name is Ron Moore, and he created Battlestar Galactica. He did a talk in 2006 at GDC. It was one of the keynotes, About the third month I started on Diablo, so you can do the math. I was on Diablo for 7 years. I was at the Halo 4 talk yesterday, and they were like, oh, it's 3.5 years. It's a really long development. I'm like, yeah, I guess that's pretty long. But it's not 7 years. So I would recommend Google this talk. I actually watched it again in kind of prep for this. He doesn't specifically bring out this kind of core pillar idea, but if you watch the talk, you can kind of see where I drew this from. And it was real inspirational for me when I first started working on Diablo 3. And the team, we started talking about what the project was going to be all about. So core pillars, what are they? Well, they're these kind of very simple bullet point ideas that define what is most important for your project. They help with hard decisions. They drive forward your subject matter. And ideally, they're very high level and they're not very specific. So I'm going to give some examples from Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica is about robots trying to wipe out humanity. So it's a story of the apocalypse. But it's also a story about family. When I did this talk practice internally, I got Bill and Lee mixed up. So if I do that again, Bill's the dad, though. I know because I got like 10 emails like, Bill's the dad, what are you know, I called Lee the dad, but Bill's the dad. So it's a story about family. What it's not a story about is Starbuck's gender. So this is the actor who played Starbucks in the original series and the actress who played Starbuck in the new series having Starbucks in a Starbucks, which I think is awesome. So this was really controversial, the changing of this character. I mean, Starbucks is like a drinking, womanizing, smoking, gambling. Like people are like, oh, women don't do those things. Of course they do. But you know, a lot of people are like, no, you can't change this character into a man. And it's just insane. So why? You know, yeah, it's not a core pillar that Starbucks be a man. But why? Why even bother to, you know, tempt fate with your most dedicated fans? And the reason is because the show's about family, and families have women in them. The writers needed a surrogate daughter for Bill Adama for the show. And so this is a really good example of looking back at their core pillars. They made a decision that was actually controversial, but led to a really good, led to a lot of good results in terms of the writing and just the overall feel of the show. So let's go over the Diablo 3 core pillars. Approachable, highly customizable, powerful heroes. I have to look. You'd think I'd know these after 7 years. Well-paced rewards, highly replayable, strong setting, and cooperative multiplayer. So we have 7 pillars. I'd say that's probably kind of the max you want to do, but who knows? You know, I think it'd be awesome if you could do a game with like 3. But obviously, I only have an hour, and I talk a lot. So I'm not going to get to all of them. I'm only going to do the first 4. And I'm not going to be comprehensive. I'm really going to cherry pick examples that kind of get this idea across. So we'll go with the first pillar, which is approachable. So if you go up and Google approachable, this dude shows up. So he seems pretty approachable to me. You know, you got the perfect, just right amount of stubble and, you know, hand out. He's a good guy. So let's talk a little bit about what this pillar meant to us as a team. So we really liked the idea that Diablo was easy to play. As one of the things that the team would say kind of early on was like, you know, this was the hardcore game that my friends and family who aren't hardcore actually played. And I love that I could just sit and, you know, shove Cheetos in my mouth and drink a beer and play with one hand. And, like that's kind of Diablo. Like not when you're playing hardcore, but it's kind of Diablo. We liked that the controls were mouse focused and we wanted to maintain that. We liked that the keyboard controls were pretty simple and we wanted to actually potentially even simplify them from Diablo 2. We also wanted to be wary of game options. So this is a total side rant, and this actually this is only me. I was the only one who wanted to be wary of game options. So players love game options, and they should. Game options are awesome for players. They're great choices. They're a great way to customize kind of how you want to play your game. However, for game developers, they're often just, you can't make up your mind. Like, it could be like this or it could be like this. We'll just make it an option. And eventually you're going to end up with like 8,000 options on your screen. And the problem is what you're doing is actually just not making a decision. So as a player, be in favor of game options. But as a game developer, always be a little nervous and wary of them because they could just be you not making a decision that you really should be making about your game. So, total side rant, done. Next rant, approachable does not equal simplistic or shallow. At Blizzard, one of our core ideas is that we make hardcore games that are easy to get into, that are easy to play. But we make hardcore games. Like, we have no notion about that. We have no desire to start suddenly making like super accessible casual games. But we do want as many people as possible to play our hardcore games. And that's what this pillar is about. So a great example of a very approachable but very deep game is Go. And I'm using it because I actually think it's easier to learn than chess, which is usually the example people use. But I can teach anyone here how to play Go in 2 minutes, and you could spend the rest of your life trying to master it. No, that's a great game. So what does approachable equal? Well, it equals doing more with less. It equals depth is a lot better than complexity. A lot of the times people use complexity to create depth, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And it means easy to learn and possible to master, which is a core kind of design value at Blizzard. So here's an example. These are a couple of items from Diablo III. The one on the left is what you're currently equipped with, and the one on the right's not as good because these numbers at the bottom tell me, wait, no, but it's got more int and vitality. It's got like 3 times more vitality. Why is it not as good? Okay, so this is a problem. Like, the average player can look at these items and be completely perplexed about which one that they should actually put on and why. And that's something we look at Diablo III and say, well, this is really a place where we kind of failed at this pillar. So depth versus complexity. Which is something we really pulled from Diablo II, like this idea of just kind of stacking lots and lots of affixes on items and everything. It really equals, let's just make it super complex and maybe people won't be able to figure it out. And the truth is that this is really kind of the easiest form of depth. It's also the least approachable. It takes your kind of basic item game and it pulls it kind of out of the hands of the average player and puts it into the hands of the people who are only really going to be able to interpret it through a lot of math. The reason why I dog on this type of depth is it often hides a lack of depth. The truth is, with almost any of these item comparisons, there's almost always a right answer. You just don't have the spreadsheet to figure it out. So as a result, it kind of made the items mathy, which is not something we wanted. Like, the fantasy of being an awesome barbarian and swinging an axe and killing dudes usually doesn't involve algebra. So that's something that we kind of look at and say is a bit of a fail on our part. So why and how did this happen? So I'm going to blame the Diablo II sorceress, not because she's not awesome, but because she's not real and she can't take it out on me. So we looked at the Diablo II sorceress, and there were a lot of things as designers that just bothered us about her. She was not reliant on items for her primary attacks or her damage, like a little bit, but for the most part, it wasn't like a barbarian, or especially a melee class. Like, they really cared about their weapon, and she didn't really care as much. She didn't need a lot of kind of defensive abilities because she had teleport. She kind of get away from most things pretty easily. She just had a lot of control in her abilities, which helped. She moved faster than any of the other classes. So in a game all about efficiency, the one who moves fastest wins. She had the best ability to stack Magic Find, which is basically the ability to find better items by stacking, this one trait on all your items. And that was because she didn't have a lot of reliance on items in general. So low reliance on items, and this made her by far the most played class in Diablo II. Now, she's really well designed too, so she's a fun class to play, and there's a lot of other reasons, but this plays a big part of why she was the most played class in Diablo II. So we really looked at the sorcerers and said we don't want to repeat those problems. We want all the classes to need their items. So we added this idea of primary stats, which are strength, dexterity, intelligence, and vitality. And they're basically where the majority of the player's damage comes from. And we said, so the player's really going to care about their items and having good items because they're going to need all these stats that are going to equal all their damage and their defense. We also said, you know what, all the characters are going to use their weapons for damage. So every character is going to care about the weapon that's in their hands. This turned item selection into a big math game, because now I'm not looking at that weapon for anything else it can do but the DPS number. And I might find a really cool item that does something really neat, but if it doesn't have the strength I need, it's rejected summarily. So this really kind of pulled out a lot of the build changer items, which was a really common thing in Diablo 2, is you'd find this item that would make you rethink what your character was going to be. And that opportunity doesn't happen nearly as much in Diablo 3 because of this kind of math problem. So we started to correct this by adding hundreds of new legendaries in patch 104. And I think that's just a kind of a first step, because I think this is something we can get back into Diablo 3 and make a lot better. But you know, the core lesson learned here is we really should have looked at our approachable pillar. We really should have said, like, hey, are we just solving problems to solve problems, or are we actually kind of making the item game better and making it more accessible to more people, and without getting rid of kind of the depth and coolness from the previous games? So we had some successes on this front. One was our choice to stick with the isometric camera. Now, if any of you here are, I'm assuming some of you at least are fans of Diablo, you're probably like, well, yeah, you did. Like, why wouldn't you? And so let's take a little trip into the way back machine to 2006 and look at some of the games that were popular. So we have Gears of War, Kami, Rainbow Six, I think this is Vegas, and Oblivion. I did like a cursory search. I didn't do like a comprehensive search, but I did kind of a cursory search online of the top most popular or best-selling games from 2006. I only found 2 isometric games, and only one of them was in the top 20. And the other one was barely in the top 50. Like in 2006, this is before the retro game movement, it was before the indie movement. Like the market was dominated by first and third person games. Like it was just kind of thought, well, this is just what you do. You just make a third or first person game. So we had a lot of people who would say to us inside the company, like, why are you guys going for this ancient, antiquated camera? You know, why aren't you embracing technology and making it third or first person game? And we said, well, because cameras aren't technology, cameras are gameplay. Like you choose your camera because you want a certain type of gameplay, not because you want to evidence a certain type of technology. And as soon as you are putting that technology before the gameplay, you're kind of making the wrong choice for the game, in our opinion, as you know, crazy gameplay first Blizzard people. Some other choices we made, moving from the potion bar to the skill-based hotbar, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we were unhappy with potions as a system in Diablo 2, and the basic reason was it was a really simplistic kind of idea. The red potion equals the red globe, and the blue potion equals the blue globe. So when the red one gets low, you hit the red button, and when the blue one gets low, you hit the blue button. So that's not a super interesting decision for the player. It's very simple, and if you actually look at the kind of potion bar from Diablo 2, you usually had 1 to 2 blue buttons and 2 to 3 red buttons. So you actually had multiple buttons even doing the same thing. So a lot of this also mostly kind of defeated the desire for the player to have any kind of defensive skills, because if they could just hit the potion button every time they were in trouble, they had no need to spend any kind of their skills or abilities on anything other than attack. This hurts class diversity because every class has the same response to a problem. And one of the things that we really wanted was for every class to have a different response to a problem. It makes each class more interesting to play. And it led to encounters that relied on them. So those of you who remember Diablo 2 might remember Duriel. So this was created by a player who has experienced what many of us have experienced, which is dying while you're loading into the Duriel encounter. So there's a lot of things I think can happen. I think that, you know, I didn't design this. I didn't work on Diablo 2. And I think the guys who did are brilliant. And so, but I look and say, this was not good. How did this end up in the game? And I think things like this can happen even to the best of designers when you kind of allow your basic design systems to support those things. So if you have a system that's kind of, you know, the potion system where it's a, you know, it's just I can keep hitting it forever and ever to try and overcome kind of whatever enemy, you end up with encounters that are kind of overly hard because you start leaning on those systems. Whereas if you kind of create you know, try to create, if you try to eliminate those kind of crutches on the design side, it's actually going to lead to better encounter design. So we've focused on a new health system, and the idea was to try and create kind of new gameplay. And you know, this is kind of our obsession at Blizzard. Anything we can do to introduce new gameplay, more gameplay, it's all about that. We had a big plaque that's like bolted into the ground at Blizzard. This is gameplay first, because that's who we are. So we really like this idea of health globes, and the health globes are drops. They drop off of monsters randomly. You pick them up and they heal you. So it's a real simple idea. We actually kind of got it from God of War was what we were playing at the time. I went, oh, let's do that. The thing we liked about this idea, we tried a bunch of other things which I originally wanted to talk about, but I don't have time. This one we liked because it rewards the player for attacking monsters. You go and attack monsters. The monsters drop the thing you need to get healthy again. So you don't want to disengage from monsters at any point. Like because you can always, even if you're low on health, you want to be more careful, but you still kind of want to engage monsters. They create a lot of positional challenges because they might drop on the other side of a bunch of monsters. So I want to reach that thing, and there's enemies in front of the thing I want to reach, and that's interesting for the player. But the randomness of them kind of forces some defensive skill use. Now, we did keep potions in. We just kind of much more limited their use. But then we also you know, really encouraged the player to take things like Frost Nova and Leap and Teleport and Ignore Pain, all these different abilities that kind of just control enemies or toughen you up for a few seconds or get you out of a bad situation. Because again, this really helps our combat model and class diversity. So here is the basic Diablo combat model. If you ever walked into a room filled with people playing Diablo, which I have many, many times, the sound of the clicking is like, it's like music. It's just like this, it's almost like you go to the beach and the waves crash, and it's great. And it's one of the things that's wonderful about the game, but we didn't want the combat model to look exactly like this. We wanted it to look a little more like this. So the red clicks are right clicks versus left, and then we've got number buttons in there. This isn't accurate. This is just me going into my PowerPoint and randomly turning some of them red. But the idea is that each place you see a number or a red click is a decision the player is making. And there are a lot of decisions, even with the previous model, the player is making. But with this one, there's more. And for us, we see that as a good thing, because now I'm having to choose, when do I use this big attack or this alternate attack or a defensive ability? All of those things, again, they create gameplay, they create opportunities, and they make the game more interesting for the player to play. So this was a big goal for us, was to try and improve the combat model. So we went from that potion bar. Once we knew we didn't want potions, we had these buttons open. We could do this kind of skill-based hotbar, where we could fill up kind of what was previously kind of buttons that were doing kind of one activity with buttons that do different things depending on your build, depending on the class you're playing. And so it gave the player more choices in combat. We also added, you know, new resource systems for all the classes, which improved things a little bit. They all kind of work very similar to one another. They're almost as much as for aesthetics as for gameplay, but they add a little bit of gameplay. Overall, though, we reduced the button count from Diablo II, mostly because we got rid of the F1 through F8 keys, which were originally used for skill choices, and now we kind of pulled everything down into the hotbar. And we increased the number of buttons there, but overall, fewer buttons, which we saw as a good thing, because those buttons all do more. So they do more things, and they're more interesting to push. And so this, to us, is kind of the core of the approachable idea, is like, it's totally okay. You want less buttons if those buttons are more interesting. And that's the better. More buttons that are less interesting is worse than less buttons that are more interesting. So led to greater class diversity, as I mentioned. But the game was still pretty easy to get into because, as I said, the actual controls were no more complex than before. Okay, the official book of correct answers and designs for all games ever. This book doesn't exist. Don't look for it. It's not in the library. Some people will tell you it exists, but they're wrong. It doesn't exist. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. There is no perfect design. Usually, almost everything you do has a con. The very thing that makes it interesting is usually the thing that makes is its con. Even just deciding, like you decided, you know what makes sci-fi cool is laser guns, but a lot of people don't like sci-fi. That's the con. So every choice you make is almost always going to have some kind of con, and these choices we made did as well. So work on the combat model caused control conflicts between the mouse and the keyboard. So turns out if you press the mouse button and the keyboard button at the same time, your character can't do two things at once, and that feels really crappy. If we kind of caught this earlier, we probably would have made more changes to kind of what went onto the keyboard versus what went onto the mouse. But we had kind of we really wanted freedom. We wanted people to kind of be able to put things wherever they wanted, and it caused a lot of control issues, which we spent a lot of time on, and I think did pretty good job of. But there's no true solving of that problem with the kind of skills that we allowed to be on both sets of controls. It caused some Diablo II skill system conflicts, which I'll talk about in the next section, and some combat mechanics diversity issues. All right, so how did we do? On the play it safe side, well, we kept the isometric camera, and I think that was a good decision and a huge win. We kept the controls basically the same, although we did some improvements to them. But itemization, not so much. Like we really, we changed some things from Diablo II that maybe didn't need changing. The game would have been better if they just kind of stayed the way they were. On the reinvent the wheel side, well, we changed the health system, and I think that was a pretty good change. We went to the skill hotbar, which I think again improves the combat over kind of the previous games. But I'm going to put itemization in this category too, because we did a bunch of new stuff, and that stuff wasn't that good either. So here, I think our lesson is don't just solve problems. As designers, it's almost your default behavior. You see a problem, you want to fix it, you want to solve it. But really kind of weigh those designs and think about them. Think about how they're going to cascade into other things. Think about how they affect kind of what was there previously. And really think about why maybe the cons of a previous system, why they were acceptable to that system. Because they probably had good reasons to be. And that doesn't mean you stick with them. It just means you really should think about it. And I don't think we did that. I think we really just kind of saw something that stuck in our craw and we wanted to fix. All right, so the next pillar, highly customizable. This pillar, what's it about? It's mostly about kind of the player's expression and the player being able to express themselves. So building your character, player expression, player identification, kind of how they identify themselves within the world and within the game. It's a source of long-term depth because players can keep playing around with who they are and in the game and how they play. It supports replayability, which is one of our other pillars that I'm not covering, but it's great when pillars commingle. So we had a few challenges that going into the customization, and this kind of whole section is kind of about conflict. What do you do when your pillars fight with one another? So we had a combat diversity problem, and that problem is we don't know what the player can do. This is the player. This is all their potential. We don't know whether they took the magnifying glass or the scissors or that little saw thing, which, by the way, I had a Swiss Army knife, and that saw can't cut through anything. I was a boy. I was destructive. So, but this is the player. We have no idea what they can do. So this was a conversation that happened multiple times in multiple forms during Diablo, which is, let's have a boss fight where the player's like on a pillar on all these like platforms, and the platforms are collapsing as the boss is fighting him, and then the player has to leap or teleport off the platform to prevent themselves from dying. And the problem is, what if the player didn't take leap or teleport? Fail. So I love this thing. It makes me laugh every time I see it. If you can't see the bottom, it says, at least turn your hat sideways. Like, come on. So let's look at this from a different perspective. Let's imagine that you're making God of War. You're making an encounter in God of War. However, Kratos may not have a ranged attack. He may not be able to jump. may not be able to evade. He may not be able to engage in melee, which seems crazy, he's Kratos, but he may not be able to do it. You just don't know. This is probably how you're going to feel when you're designing those encounters, like just unable to do anything. So this was the problem that we had. A high level of player customization equals basically simpler combat mechanics and scenarios, because you have to basically accommodate everything the player could ever possibly be. So the thing is, we had no diverse combat mechanics pillar. It was a goal. We wanted to make combat more diverse. We wanted to have better combat mechanics, but it wasn't a pillar. Customization was a pillar, so it wins, and there's no debate here. So this is a great example of like how your pillars can help you make decisions, especially between what you'd like to do, but what you really should do. So we never stopped fighting for combat depth. When we did tons of work on monsters and varied abilities. We explored a lot of combat mechanics on the classes. We tried to exploit weaknesses in the various classes. We actually have monsters who will there's this one monster called I think it's the Dune Thresher. He basically burrows underground and he beelines towards ranged characters. So he's essentially like, he basically takes away the advantage of a ranged character has, which is, I want to keep you at range. So we totally took advantage of the player's weaknesses, but we never required them to have certain abilities, and we felt that that was core to this pillar. So another conflict we had was with the Diablo II skill system. So for those of you who may not have played Diablo II, I'll talk, this is the Diablo II skill system, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of how it worked. So essentially, this system uses skill points. It's a hierarchical tree. You spend points and kind of progress up the tree also as you, unlock via levels. So with a system like this, really, because every skill point is kind of a mathematical bit of power, players want to put as many points into as few things as possible. They essentially would like to have, if they get 120 skill points, they want to put all 120 into one skill if they can, because that's going to make that skill super powerful. So they added a system called synergies in one of the patches to Diablo 2, which essentially kind of doubled down on that idea, which is if you could spend points on skills that would actually buff other skills. And so essentially it was kind of a way to put as many skills as possible into one. So kind of one of the issues with this system is that skill points often have kind of a math test right answer. This is something we talk about within the company, which is it a customization system or is it a test? If any of you have played World of Warcraft with any kind of regularity, you've probably at some point in your career had someone tell you that your talent points were spent incorrectly. But it's a customization system. I should be able to do whatever I want. And the truth is you can, but other players are going to think you're a bozo if you didn't do exactly the right thing, which the forums have already figured out and worked out for you. So we don't consider that a customization system. And chasing customization systems is, true customization systems is something we've been doing in Blizzard now for the last few years. So this system has level requirements, which is great. It supports progression. Encourages, it has a downside in that because, again, I want to put as many points as possible into the one skill I really want. It makes me want to hoard my points, which makes me want to not spend. Now, some people like this, but overall, we kind of viewed it as getting a point and not spending it is not fun. Like, we wanted you, if we give you something, you should spend it. And you should feel good about spending it. It has kind of minimal other requirements, which again provides a high degree of customization. It's a good part of that system. But again, further kind of encourages skill dumps because you really only need like 1 point in one skill to get the next skill down. So, again, I'm going to put all those points into one thing. And kind of the biggest problem with this one is it really causes you to take a bunch of unused skills. At the end of the game, you'll have like 20 skills and 17 or 16 you won't even use. Which, again, we saw as an issue. So Diablo 2 skill tree system, a system result, you really want to go deep on few skills, ideally one. Like the player really kind of wants to focus everything on that one skill. Diablo 3 combat model, we really wanted to diversify among a half dozen equally kind of powerful and useful skills. So this is a big conflict and one that we had to figure out a resolution to. So the thing was, though, we really, in this case, you really want to look where the conflict comes from. And in this case, it came from a pre-existing system, not actually one of our core pillars. Now, you can look at the customizability pillar and say, well, that's the Diablo II skill system. But we look at the customizability pillar and say the Diablo II skill system was just part of that. And so that pre-existing system had other issues that we wanted to solve, like point hoarding and wasted skills. And so we asked ourselves, is it possible to change those systems and accomplish both the goals of customization and greater skill diversity? And so our answer was the Diablo III skill system. So essentially the way this works is there's 6 categories for kind of active use skills and 3 categories for passive skills. There's no skill points, so the player can kind of choose what they want within kind of each category freely, not worry about one skill being more powerful than another. And there's really no reason for them not to take all of these. They're actually just kind of nerfing themselves if they don't. So it kind of supported that idea that we had of we wanted to encourage multiple skill usage. We wanted a much more diverse kind of set of skills that the players were using. It keeps skills at equal power level, which kind of solves some of the point hoarding problems and things like that. It provides a high amount of customization still. This is probably a source of argument amongst ourselves and our players. But the truth is there's billions, I actually think there's trillions of combinations of how this system can play out. And if that's not a customization system with trillions of options, I'm not sure what is. And it allows a lot of experimentation, which was really just our choice. As we continued to play the game, this was the feedback we got from the majority of people that were playing it, was that they wanted to be able to kind of reset. They wanted to be able to change kind of what they were doing. So as I mentioned, all designs have cons. With this system, level up feels less awesome. Because a lot of the times you're going to get skills or runes that you don't want to use. If you're playing a barbarian and you're not interested in weapon throw, then this level you unlock weapon throw is not an awesome level for you. So the lack of kind of hard choices can hurt replay for some players. I also think there's a lot of players who will never re-roll a character, like even in a game like Diablo where the characters are somewhat disposable. I do think that in a post-MMO age, people just kind of have a bit of an allergic reaction to that. There's certainly a contingent of players, though, that this hurt replay for them, like this system. And ideally, you kind of cater to everyone, but we made a choice that we thought would be for the majority of our players. So let's look at how we did. Play it safe. Well, a lot of our combat mechanics really were pulled directly from Diablo II. Our monster designs and things like that. Diablo II was a very well-designed game, so that was good. Reinvent the wheel, the skill system. And overall, I think we've gotten more positive feedback than negative on it. And so I think that was a success as well. And so the lessons I'm going to pull from this is you want to pursue and improve on your core pillars. You don't just want to look at the past and just kind of pull that forward. You have an obligation of, if customization is important to you, you don't just want to do it. You want to do it better than the previous games did it. You want to find a way to improve. And also, you may have secondary goals you want to accomplish, but if those goals conflict with your core pillars, then they should either be mitigated or potentially even removed. All right, so well-paced rewards is our next category. I kind of feel like most games should have this pillar, but it's probably more like most games should have this design philosophy. We made it a pillar of Diablo because Diablo is a game so known for its reward systems. So the first thing I want to say is rewards are not just about items. I think when people think about the Diablo games, they think about and rewards, they immediately gravitate towards items. But Diablo, especially Diablo II, is one of the most brilliant games ever made in terms of all the other rewards it gives to you. And it almost has to be because the item system in Diablo 2 is random. So as designers, you really don't have any idea when that good item is going to show up. So you can't pace your reward system very well. However, if you look at Diablo 2 and if you time it, which I have many times, you will find that the changes from one environment to the next come at almost metronome-like rates. Every 15 minutes you see a new environment. Every 45 minutes you go to an environment you've never seen before. Almost every environment has one new monster in it. Kind of just the pacing of kind of everything that is given to you throughout the game is expertly done. So I would encourage, when you're thinking about rewards, every single thing you put in your game is a reward to your player. If you make a cool tree, that's a reward, seeing that cool tree. So don't throw those things away. Use all of them. However, I'm going to talk about items because that's what everybody cares about. So items are not the only thing, but that's all I'm going to talk about. And I'm also going to talk about the auction house because, admit it, you all want me to. Okay, let's start with some assumptions about the auction house. These are assumptions that we made before Diablo III went live. It will reduce account fraud. There's a lot of people going to third-party websites, getting their account information or their credit card information stolen. If they don't have a desire or need to go to a third-party website, that's going to happen less often. That was an assumption. It provides players with a wanted service. All we had to do was look at the Diablo II community and see how many services kind of came up around trading and selling items that we could tell this is something that some portion of our player base wants. We assumed a small percentage of players would use it, and this is kind of a complex assumption, but it essentially came down to we assumed most of the sellers would gravitate towards the real money auction house, and the buyers would follow the sellers, and that buyers would be reticent to spend real money. I mean, when we were talking about this, we're like, I balk at an iPhone app that costs more than $2. Like, I'm really going to spend like a ton of money on an item in a game. You're going to see this is one of the ones we're wrong about. Only a very high-end items will be worth very much. So we kind of assumed there would be a big dearth of stuff that was worth nothing, and then at the very, very top end, stuff that was worth everything. Price will limit volume both high and low. And this kind of meant that, again, players probably wouldn't find it worth putting low-end items on because they just wouldn't get enough for it. And players probably wouldn't gravitate to spend hundreds of dollars on items. And so we kind of just figured over time, people will stop putting low-end stuff on, and the high-end stuff will kind of just be regulated by the number of buyers that are out there. So the red ones are the ones we were wrong about, and these were pretty bad ones to be wrong about. So it does reduce account fraud, at least anecdotally. Any region we have it in, the account fraud's way, way lower, and that's a huge problem for us. You can't be underestimated. Does provide players with the wanted service. We can tell by how many people use it. They obviously want it. And yes, only high-end items were worth much, but almost every player at least went into the auction house once, and about 50% of our player base uses it regularly. So we were totally wrong about the small percentage of players using it. We were also totally wrong about any kind of limits on volume. People put everything on the auction house because there's just no reason not to. Now, we did have some systems in the game that we thought would pull items from, but the thing is, when we built the game, we didn't have an auction house internally, and we had no way to test it. So we didn't really know the impact it would have. We were kind of guessing at the impact it would have, and it had a much bigger one than we expected. So those systems just didn't work at all. There's systems in the game that almost seem like, why are these even here? And it's like, well, because they were supposed to pull items out, but they didn't work. So the result is what I want is to kill this guy and have cool stuff drop and get items. But this is actually what happened. So if anyone can't see, it says money, best superpower ever, which I totally agree with because Iron Man's cool. But it's not good for a game like Diablo. It doesn't feel good to get items from money. You want to get items from killing monsters. So the result is both auction houses damage item rewards. And I know a lot of people like to pick on the real money auction house, but the truth is the gold one has much higher volume, and in the long run we feel actually does more damage than the real money one does. But they both really hurt the game, and this is unacceptable to us. At Blizzard, we're all about our game. We're all about gameplay. I think the biggest issue that we have right now is we have no idea. We know a lot of people use the auction house, and we have a pretty good concurrency. We have about 1 million players every day log into the game, and 3 million unique players every month. So we've got a lot of people playing the game. They obviously must like the game that's there. How many of them like the auction house versus hate it? We don't know. If we take it away, like, players don't like having stuff taken away, or are those people just going to be unhappy and leave? So it's a real tough question for us. It's not as easy as just turning it off. I think we would turn it off if we could, though. So a solution is very much needed, and it's something we are working on, and it's something we continue to talk about. I'm no longer the game director because I've moved on to other things in Blizzard, but you know, this is something I know that the team talks about every week and wants to fix. So how do we do on rewards? Well, we really kind of kept, I know I didn't talk much about it, but monster and environment distribution, we didn't keep everything exactly the same because there were some challenges with making kind of a bit more modern game. But for the most part, we really tried to just do as much like the previous games as possible because it was done so well. On Reinvent the Wheel, the auction house, and obviously it didn't turn out the way we'd hoped. So don't fix what isn't broken. Monster and environment distribution was not broken, it was wonderful. So it was definitely one of the things we looked at and says, this is one of the best things in Diablo 2, so this is one of the ones that's totally okay for us to just try and live up to. Now you're probably expecting me to say, and don't do stuff like the auction house, but actually what I would say is, you can't be afraid to take some chances to solve major problems. In this day and age, if you have a game that's going to be as popular as a game like Diablo that involves traded items, you are going to have hacking, security, account problems, account fraud, and that's a terrible experience for your players, and you have to find a way to deal with it. I mean, I know we should say that that's our problem, it's a security problem, so it's Blizzard's problem, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to find some answer within your design to try and address this. So we picked the wrong answer, but I still stand by the fact that we were trying to solve a problem that very much needs to be solved. All right, the last pillar we're going to talk about today, which is powerful heroes. So the idea of powerful heroes, this is the few against the many. This is kind of the idea of the player kind of fighting against the kind of endless hordes of everything. And this is kind of the core. They affect encounter design and combat. We have a massive death system in the game that essentially allows monsters to be beheaded and melted and vaporized and eviscerated and disassembled. And all of that is actually to make the player feel awesome. So we put a ton of work into those systems to kind of get this idea. Identifiable archetypes. You know, this really affected class design. We looked at kind of the previous classes for Diablo and said, you know, the archetypes were really identifiable. A little bit quirky, and I'll talk about that, but very identifiable. And player gets abilities that are so good that they feel unfair to the monsters. So definitely a big kind of pillar of the Diablo series, and this really affects skill design. So enabling the creative process, and kind of this is where a big win for us, which was class creation on Diablo 3 and just the process we went through for it. So I'm really going to take this is maybe a slight detour, but I think it's useful enough that in general that it's worth going on. So this is how we kind of went through our class creation process. We started with basic archetypes. So we didn't say barbarian. We said we wanted a melee warrior, we wanted a magic range character, we wanted a conventional range character, we wanted a pet class, and then we kind of said, well, and the last one will be a wild card. We knew we wanted 5 because we wanted to have the same number that Diablo 2 had. But so we just started there and said, okay, so now we kind of know a little bit something about what's coming. So when we go to, if I'm going to make any decision about any one of them, it can be an informed one based on what we think the other archetypes are going to be. So the next step is to actually define the class. So this is kind of choosing your archetype. So it's like, okay, we said we're going to do a melee warrior monk. Okay, cool. We've chosen our flavor of melee warrior. So this should fit into kind of whatever your overall archetype vision is. And what I mean by that is, if you look at different games, they tend to have a good, you know, especially the best ones, tend to have kind of an overall kind of tenet for which they built their classes to. If you look at like World of Warcraft, they went for very high level kind of archetypes, mage and warrior, you know, very, you know, I don't want to use the word generic. I almost say like core, you know, and I like to use it as like if you looked at Dungeons and Dragons. WoW would probably be like the core classes, fighter and magic user and things like that. Diablo is actually more of what I call like the sub D&D classes. So the assassin and illusionist and barbarian, they're all kind of a sub of another kind of more core class. And it makes them a little quirkier and a little more unusual. It fits the tone of Diablo a little better. So this was our kind of overall archetype vision. We really wanted to pick things that were a little quirky, but still, if I say to you kind of witch doctor, oh, that's different. I haven't heard that before, but I think he would have like zombies and probably pets and do voodoo. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much what you're going to get. So this is the easiest and hardest part. It's the easiest part to go, we're going to make a monk. It's actually also the hardest part because this is the part where your team's going to argue the most. Like we had hours and hours of discussion about classes at the start of development, and the problem is that we spent most of the time talking about just the name. Like, oh, well, we should make a ranger, or we should make a dervish, or we should make a monk, and what the hell's a dervish? And we would just do this like back and forth about and we were never doing this really talking about what the player was going to be doing, which is way more important. You kind of have to do this step first because you can't start talking about what the player's going to do, but don't get stuck on it. It's not nearly as important as what makes this idea awesome. So move on quickly, and if you go to this next step and you don't come up with awesome stuff, then go back to the previous step, but don't get stuck on the previous step. So the next thing is the most important step was defining the fantasy. So this is what makes this class awesome. What makes the player want to play it? What makes them kind of fresh and original? Because you want a little bit of originality in anything you do. You want to have that thing that makes that class a little different. So for the monk, like for example, our thing was, well, he's kind of a bit of a blend of like a European bookish monk and an Asian kung fu monk. So that kind of combination of putting those two things together make him kind of what you expect, but also a little different than what you expect. The other thing, though, is also make sure that you're identifying what the player really wants. Now, we had an argument on the team, which hopefully I'm not stirring the pot on, about whether the monk should be fat. A lot of the people on the team really wanted him to be fat because they thought that was cool and different, and I was really opposed to that because I said, well, the problem is that when I see the lineup of characters and I see the big stocky melee warrior, I'm going to think that guy's probably slow and tough. And if I'm playing a fighting game and I choose that character and I go in and he's actually fast and not very tough, it was a 2-minute commitment. I can choose a different character the next time. But in a role-playing game, like that's hours and hours, potentially hundreds of hours of commitment. So the class, I felt very strongly that the class had to somewhat represent how that class was going to play. So it was important that the monk be thin, that he not look as resilient, that he look fast, because that was kind of the core of who he was. So this is way more important than anything else, more important than the name, the look, the story, anything. If you don't know the reason why the player wants to play this class, then you shouldn't make it. So next step is kind of setting primary themes. And this step you want to do, again, early on, you just do very high level. You don't want to get, there's time for depth later, but early on, you just want to go like a really quick description. Who are they? What kind of weapons do they use? This is kind of a mix of art and story and mechanics. Kind of what kind of mechanics do you want them to have? But really stay very high level at this point. You don't want to write a lore Bible at this point. You just want to kind of get an idea of who they are. So this is an example of the Demon Hunters kind of one-pager that was when we first started building the class. And you can see it's mostly skills. It's mostly, hey, these are the cool things the Demon Hunter is going to do. And all but one of these skills actually made it to the final game. So the theming is this kind of ranged attacks and shadow energy and gadgets and contraptions. We actually didn't even have kind of the revenge story idea, which was a big part of her theme, but it wasn't that important at this point. It was also a little bit evident in the name and kind of who she was. So for the monk, the defining mechanics, melee, auras, healing, speed, combos, which didn't really work out that well, but it's okay. Defining flavor, force of good, holy power, religious, disciplined, righteous. You'll notice I don't talk about, we don't talk about like what's his religion. That doesn't matter. It just matters that he's religious because it's going to set the tone for the effects and abilities and things like that. So once you have all those things, the next thing you're going to do is create defining skills. So defining skills are 3 to 5 skills that will be archetypal for the character. They're the things that when the character does it, everyone on your team and every player you said looks at it and goes, oh, that's really awesome, I want to do that. And they've got to be super fun, and every skill that kind of comes after has to be informed by these. So if you do these right, then it actually makes the whole process easier, because everyone who works on it can kind of look at those kind of archetypal core skills and just kind of emulate them and say, oh, I get who this guy is. So they tell you who the class is. They make you excited to play. They favor fantasy over mechanics. This is not the time to try and figure out what the core mechanics of your class are supposed to be. This is the time where you're trying to figure out what the awesome is. The awesome is really, really hard. You want it to come first because it makes everything else easy. Because when everyone's excited about something, it's way easier to get them talking about it. The ideas are going to flow when people are excited. So a good example is, don't say you need a healing skill. Instead, say he protects his allies with holy power. So the difference here is very subtle, but the result is the difference between a very generic, I press the button and I heal, versus crazy circles that monsters can't pass, or shields that you can project out, or just kind of ideas that are a little bit, maybe not all great ideas, maybe some of them will fail, but they're interesting and they're different. And if you are leading with fantasy, you'll more often get to those really cool kind of different ideas. So how did we do on Play It Safe? We followed a lot of the Diablo core fantasy of how the class is played and what the actual kind of combat is like. Awesome comes first, which I think is, again, a core tenet from the previous games. That was all about making the player feel awesome and empowered. And we really followed kind of the same idea of the Diablo class archetypes. We went for different classes for the most part, but we still kind of followed the high-level design of the previous games. So reinvent. Skill design, I think we really, because we went for a much more diverse type of skill set, I think we did a lot of new things on that front, and I think made the game more interesting, made the combat more interesting. And how we interpreted the archetypes, I think, was really interesting, in that we tried to, we made the barbarian old, for example, which I thought was, again, a kind of an interesting choice. But we didn't make him so old that he broke the fantasy. We didn't, he was not walking with a cane and decrepit. So he's still big and muscular, but he's got a gray beard, and it's kind of cool. So the point is here, define your boundaries and then push against them. Your core pillars are not about just, here's what I'm going to follow. These are the things that we do. Just, you're supposed to make every one of them better. So you're supposed to look for every opportunity. If there's any place that you're going to look at your game and say, how can I make something better? It should be at your core pillars, more than any place else. All right, so in summary, how core pillars can be used. They're as high level as possible. I can't encourage that enough. Like, don't be super specific. Like, we didn't say, like, for example, one of the core pillars is highly replayable. It could have been everything random, which was kind of something we said a lot. But I felt like randomness was a tool to what we really wanted, which was replayability. So replayability was the pillar, not randomness. And I think that as a result, you get you get a broader perspective, and you get replayability across more systems. Guide for making good decisions. It helps you resolve conflicts between what you'd like to do and what you should do, which I think is a very critical idea. That a lot of there's so many decisions you can make on a game, and so many of them are awesome, but you can't make all of them, and so you really kind of need a way to kind of find your way in the storm back to those kind of core ideas that you want to build on. They remind you of the big picture. As game developers, we're constantly immersed in an ocean of minutia. And you're buried in it, and so you really need the ability to kind of look and say, wait, what are we trying to do? Oh yeah, that. So they push you to take what was good about the previous IP or game and make it great. But the most important one, and this is the one that I like the most, is if you do them right, and I'm not saying we did them right, I think we could do them way better the next time, but if you do them right, they enable creative freedom on a large team. Ideally, when you've got 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 people working on a team, it's very, very difficult for the individual person to feel like they're impacting, to feel like they can be kind of creative within the boundary of what they're working on. But if they understand kind of what's important to the game at a high level, and they're encouraged to kind of take risks that fit into those ideas, again, you'll sometimes get tangents, but maybe that's okay. Like, you get cool stuff out of it. And the point of it is that if you can get to that point where you have that kind of defined existence, then a lot of the time your team can act a lot more creatively and with a lot more freedom. So that is my talk. And I don't know if we have time for questions. No time for questions. Sorry.